Today, we're focused on closing the AI value gap. And I'm thrilled to be joined by an expert on the subject and a Vercel customer, Dan Martinez, Managing Director at BCG Platinion. So Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Jeanne. Great to be here.
Awesome. Well, maybe to sort of set the table for us, BCG research found that only 5% of companies are generating substantial value from AI, while 60% are still struggling. What's creating this gap? Is it the technology problem, an execution problem, or something else entirely?
Well, Jeanne, if we look into the last 3 years, right, since Gen AI basically started in 2023, lots of companies started with use cases and pilots, right? And I found that some companies were almost like competing for how many use cases they could get to. And sometimes they would get to 100 or 300. I've seen organizations have, hundreds of these use cases. And I feel like ultimately people just got stretched too thin. Some of these ideas were very small. They were not what we consider process reimagination. They were not functional reimaginations of the organization. And and then people just, I feel like they got lost in the shuffle. And some of these ideas, I think the business was aiming too low. Also, we found that some of these ideas were not, they did not involve capability build. So people were developing these use cases, but they weren't clear. What is the change in job families? How does that change on upskilling? What is the impact on people? What is the impact on processes? So I feel like organizations were missing the bulk of the work, which is what we at BCG, we call the 10-20-70, which is 10% is tech, 20% is data algorithms, and then 70% is really the bulk of the work. It's rethinking the businesses, rethinking tasks, how processes are different, who needs to be upskilled, how jobs will change. And I feel like 23, 24, it was just a lot of people, experimenting, testing with these use cases, but not really thinking about, look, they have to go into production. They need to scale. We need to think about a whole bunch of stuff. So I feel like companies now are building the muscle, the discipline, the attention span. The leadership is looking at this. AI is no longer a technology project. AI is no longer a little experimental project. It's here to stay. It's existential risk. It's competitive advantage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think your point on 70%, a lot of what I found in the work we've been doing in GTM is actually a lot of that is even pre-production, if you will, of understanding what a best-in-class process ought to look like. And do you have all the content for that? Have you brought it through? So piggybacking on this, there's a phrase that's been coming up in enterprise AI conversations, which is the shift from systems of record to systems of work. What does that mean in practice, and why does it matter for how companies think about their technology investments?
Yeah, I first saw this concept in an article from a VC in the Bay Area, where they talked about, with the emergence of digital 20 years ago, companies moved from on-premise software to SaaS and moving to large enterprise packages, what we call systems of record, right? So if you think of Salesforce or ServiceNow or Workday, right? These are systems that hold a lot of corporate data. They have your customers, your orders, your deliveries, right? Your financial data is in these systems. But then over time, we felt that people wanted to collaborate differently. And we've seen the emergence of more modern systems of engagement. For example, Slack or Teams, Zoom, for example, and people are using these systems to engage, collaborate internally, collaborate externally. So it's almost like the user interface, to think from an enterprise architecture perspective, the UI has moved from the systems of record to the systems of engagement. And now what we're seeing with AI is a new phenomenon altogether, which is the business logic of some of these systems of record are now moving to systems of work, and they're becoming agentic, right? So what we used to see as rules-based deterministic types of features, now they're moving to probabilistic system prompts in these multi-agent systems. And of course, the hyperscalers are moving in that direction. They're creating lots of platforms. I mean, Vercel is in that scope as well, allowing companies to very quickly, rapidly build these new agentic systems. And then we see companies like Salesforce, they're moving in that direction as well, right? They're building Agent Force as a capability and going to market with ready-made agents, right? And this is something that I feel like CIOs are starting to understand and grasp this new reality, right? Moving from these systems of record. How do I invest in these systems of record going forward? But then how do I build capability that allows me to shift these business rules into agentic systems. Um, I feel like this is becoming more clear. 2025, 2026 is when we started to see organizations move to multi-agent systems, start to go from experimentation to production, building more resiliency, governance, all the architecture around it. And that's the pattern that we expect to see more and more in 26 and 27.
Yeah, I mean, I can bring that to life pretty specifically with Vercel of how you describe it. It aligns exactly with what we've experienced here, which is we've got Salesforce, still a system of record. We started by building a singular agent to handle our inbound leads. So folks who fill out contact sales. In building that agent, we were able to go from 10 sales development reps down to one. That then formed the basis of a playbook platform where we now have multiple types of the sales development function. So event follow-up, or hot PLG leads, that type of thing. So you've got all of those multiple agents running, and then to your point, system of engagement. So a bunch of this stuff gets now piped into Slack, or built custom workflow UIs, because Salesforce front end didn't necessarily represent those exactly how we wanted. So actually, what you just teed up is precisely what we've seen play out in our first 6 months of bringing AI really deeply to go to market. How do you help companies identify which workflows to prioritize? At Vercel, we're very much working to avoid random acts of AI. So we found that the highest likelihood of success for agents comes from tasks that are a little bit more on the repetitive and deterministic side. So not a ton of cognitive load. The lead agent example I just got is a good one. Does that match what we're seeing? BCG, to my knowledge, uses languages like stop with the use case mindset and sort of open that way, and pilot purgatory I've heard a couple times.
Yes.
So I think you're spiritually aligned with Vercel's random acts of AI. But again, how do you go from that rapid prototyping to picking the use cases that are actually going to drive value?
Yeah, I think we're super aligned there. I mean, 23, 24, everybody was stuck in pilot purgatory, learning, figuring out the technology, solving accuracy, hallucination problems, building RAG applications, um, but ultimately realizing that it was very hard to scale. And I think people realized that it was hard to scale because there's a lot of work on the business side, right? Retraining people, rethinking processes, et cetera. And I feel like we shifted from that use case pilot mentality to focused on value pools. And what are these big reshape opportunities for organizations, right? So how does my servicing organization will be different? How will my finance function will be different? How will my supply chain function be different? So I think people start to amplify the scope, think process value chain level, picking specific examples in the value chain to drive, but really focus on a much bigger scope, in a scope that's much more business led, a scope that requires risk, compliance, legal to be involved to make sure that we understand all the ins and outs of this thing. Um, and so we sort of moved away from use cases into value pools. Doesn't mean that companies are not using use cases. I still see that language happening, but we're moving to value pools. And we see, for example, some very clear value pools in the market. So for example, servicing, customer service, help desk has been arguably number one area of where companies are using AI. We're starting to see a bigger emergence of startups in this space. Some are becoming well solidified in the market. AI for software engineering. I mean, this is a huge value pool for organizations. This is exactly where Vercel is squarely in as one of the leaders in the market, driving the charge here, driving the journey. I mean, I feel like we're just scratching the surface there. The tools are gaining adoption. The engineering teams are building on top of it. I mean, some of these tools are becoming more integrated and embedded with the ecosystem and enterprises. This is actually one of the things I really like about Vercel, the fact that you guys already built lots of integrations that are very thoughtful about, right? So, if companies need to do this on a hyperscaler, they have to work through lots of hyperscaler services to pick from, et cetera. I feel like, again, we're just scratching the surface here. We're going to quickly move into using these technologies to build multi-agent systems, to build digital twins of organizations. And this is where we're starting to see the next future proofing. of the organization, right? What's emerging at BCG is this ability to develop digital twins of processes, of functions, of departments, right? This is such a scalable concept, right? If I'm, instead of focusing on use cases, instead of focusing on value pools, can I create a digital twin of the organization and then simulate improvement ideas, right? And we're starting to like dip our feet in that in organizations where if an organization comes to us with a specific problem, we create this it's almost like a reimagination AI that allows us to feed data into it and resimulate tasks and processes and what if scenarios, right? At the enterprise level. It's a really interesting experiment. I mean, I feel like we're just now scratching the surface there as well. But hopefully that'll inform how we find these value pools in organizations, right?
This isn't exactly the point you were making, but on the thought of a digital twin, we have an internal data agent. You can think of it as like take about like a data scientist analyst with about a decade of experience, and it's sort of that level of capability. And this weekend, someone added that agent to the executive channel, and so we were all joking that this was, the first agent promotion.
Hmm.
Company. But we absolutely are doing that. We're pretty far along, I would say, on the data science side of things, where you can actually see ways in which the agents that team is creating are in fact digital twins. You also started getting into sort of like, how do you go from the prototype to production, touching on things like integrations, all the types of things that folks don't necessarily think about when you're prototyping, but you don't want to have to go spin up 20 underlying services at AWS necessarily. Um, so what are the best ways you've seen folks bridge that gap?
We're starting to bucket those gaps in specific archetypes for organizations. We came up with these 4 archetypes of AI agents. Um, the first one is people are going to self-service the development of agents, right? And they're going to use, and maybe some people call them agents or not, but regardless, custom GPTs or, self-service tools where people are going to, Cloud Skills, for example, and, people are going to use these tools to develop their own agents, connect with systems. Like, for example, I have an agent that runs every morning, reads my email, sends me a summary of what do I need to do, what actions I need to take, and sends me all the emails I need to respond, prioritize. Okay, I mean that's a self-service agent I run in one of the tools, and it's helpful for me personally. But then we're going to see other types of agents that are built still by employees in organizations, where they're built in tools like Microsoft Copilot, running in enterprise systems, running connected to tools like SharePoint, connected to data, etc. I mean, a bit more sophisticated, but still within the realm of employees developing them. Then companies are going to buy agents, right? And they're going to buy agents from Agentforce and whatnot, right? So we're starting to do more, for example, market scan of agents, right? Just like we used to do for digital apps and SaaS companies. Now we're doing market scans for agents. And then the next one is where IT is going to come in and develop enterprise agents, right? And that's going to become, much more, science than art. It's going to become, there's going to be a lot of rigor around these agents. We have to test them, develop them well, and there's going to be a lot more scrutiny around information security and, policies, legal rigor. For example, responsible AI is going to be a big important component there, guardrails. And then for these agents, we have an enterprise framework on how to develop these agents, right? This is where we see AI coding tools becoming, a huge value for IT teams. I actually do think that when we think about buy versus build, solutions like Vercel and AI coding tools are going to enable IT teams to become very proficient at building.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we share a similar point of view on CIOs going from buyers of software to builders of software. I think a lot of the use cases we're seeing on Vercel are internal applications just as much as external. So if CIOs are now becoming software builders rather than just buyers, what is that shift from a role perspective? What's going to be new about the role of the CIO?
Yeah, that's interesting because on one side, this is totally elevating the buy versus build discussion and what does it mean for IT. We've seen companies, like consumer companies, start to hire agent developers, right? So these are no longer your typical machine learning engineer that may have a PhD in data science and knows Python really well. And I've seen a job description for one of these companies, and it didn't even require Python, for example, right? So it's a new strange world that we're getting into, right? Now people are enabled and self-sufficient to develop their own agents.
Yeah, and so a lot of what you're describing here is really a central AI platform. And your research has shown that future built companies are 3x more likely to operate a central AI platform. Agents multiply across the enterprise. What should that platform architecture actually look like?
We've been having lots of conversations with organizations around how to design this platform, right? And the design, I'd say the design, 2 years ago focused a lot on building simple RAG applications, right? So it's all about, make a choice on a vector database, make a choice on LLM that sits on your model garden, build guardrails at the application level, and you're good, right? And your biggest headache is, accuracy problems. But that we've seen a departure from that thinking, right? And nowadays, it's becoming much more complex, right? You need guardrails not just at the agent level, you need guardrails at the orchestration level. You need to control not just for accuracy, you need to control for integration with core systems. There's a multi-layer way of thinking about security on these agents. So there's a lot to think about, right? CIOs are having to adapt their IT teams, upskill their architectural teams to be able to deal with this additional level of complexity. But that's what we need to think about when we go to multi-agent systems, right? Multi-agent systems is going to be a big step for organizations to be comfortable with, but that's what we see a big part of the value coming up in 26 and 27.
So you touched a little bit on the application layer there. If we're moving towards systems of work that we talked about, what role does the application layer play? Does the software that sits between AI models and users become more or less strategic?
I mean, for sure, they certainly have a strategic role because they are the system of record. So they ultimately have the repository on data in the organization, right? So they will continue to be very valuable in that sense. Um, they're also very valuable because they're going to provide those enterprise APIs for agents to use in organizations. Um, but the question is, some of the business logic is moving from systems of record to systems of work. So it begs the question: what will happen to SaaS? Right? We've seen some tech leaders saying the SaaS is dead. I'm not quite there yet, but I do think that they're going to become very strong databases for with a very specific structure, with very specific control points, and they will continue to be valuable that way. Right? Some of these companies are realizing that this trend is coming and they're moving towards AI. Makes perfect sense, right? Some are more holding their fort and trusting that the wait and see mode a bit. But we'll see in next 12, 24 months, we're starting to see an emergence of these systems of work. Many of these are offering great opportunities for buy. I do think that SaaS companies will need to become AI first, right, instead of digital first. And that's going to take time, especially for some of the big ones.
So you mentioned there being a lot of opportunities, but you could also say that the AI vendor landscape is overwhelming right now. I think like most categories have 10 players in them, which seems like more than I'll probably be supported long term. But what questions should enterprise buyers be asking to separate real capability from marketing? And how do they evaluate whether a tool will actually deliver value versus become shelfware?
Well, for sure, there's a technology fit, right? How will these companies, how will those agents run on a enterprise infrastructure? How are they integrated into that technology stack? How are they integrated with the systems of record, for example, right? That's an ongoing discussion. Then we ask questions around enterprise fit. For example, how do they manage compliance? How do they manage risk? How do they treat data privacy? Those are top of mind questions. You cannot, it's not, it's a non-starter at enterprise companies if they don't have a good answer for these types of questions. We look at cost. right? So that's the buy versus build cost. Um, and some of these solutions are very expensive, right? They charge at the user per month level, and this is going to in companies we need to allocate budget for these types of solutions. I mean, these solutions are coming; they're more expensive, but they're very valuable. And then we look at maturity of the company. As you said, some of these are new entrants. Many of these are still in Series A, Series B. Many of these have maybe 100 to 100 employees, right? So they're younger companies and they're trying to get into an enterprise space. The enterprise space is very complex, and requires a lot of attention. Requires, it's a long sales cycle. Some of these companies, they take 6 to 9 months to onboard a new AI agent, right? That's pretty reasonable. I see that all the time. And companies are trying to figure out how do we fast track this process, but there's a lot of due diligence process to onboard one of these vendors, right? But I'm starting to see, interestingly, some of these started with small to mid-sized companies. Some of these vendors, these AI agents, they started with retail consumer, and I'm working with one of them, and this is going to be the first quarter where the enterprise revenue tops the retail revenue. So we're starting to see the shift towards enterprise becoming the biggest customer for some of these solutions.
Yeah, seeing the same thing over here at Vercel. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation. For everyone watching, if you want to continue the discussion, please connect with Dan or me on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear what you're seeing in your own organizations. And if you're ready to move from prototype to production, check out the new V0 at v0.app. We just shipped some major updates that make it easier than ever to go from idea to deployed application. Thanks for joining our first shipped Q&A. We'll see you all next time.